Hello everyone, welcome. I hope you're all doing well. Welcome to another lesson in our ongoing French course. In this lesson, we are going to revisit the verb préférer. In our last lesson, we looked at the forms of the verb préférer in the present tense. We learned how to use it. In this lesson, we are going to focus on what you can do with it. I'm going to show you some examples of the various things that you can do with the verb préférer conjugated in the present tense. And I'm also going to show you an old-fashioned technique for sharpening your linguistic skills, something that will help you think on your feet and produce the language more quickly. Remember that préférer is a regular ER verb in that it uses the regular ER verb endings. It is, however, a spelling change verb, so as we add our endings to the root, notice the little spelling change that occurs there. So be aware of that. This change occurs in all of the forms except for the nous and the vous. Okay, so here in the last form, notice the je, tu, il, elle, on. The il and elle forms have the spelling change, but the nous and the vous don't. Last time we learned that there are two important things that you can do with a conjugated préféré in the present tense. You can add a noun after the conjugated form to say that you prefer something. In other words, when you have a choice among two or more things, you prefer one over the other, and that something is a noun. In French, we might say préférer quelque chose, to prefer something. And again, remember the quelque chose is a noun. Let's say you're in a restaurant and you're offered a choice, soup or salad. Which do you prefer? Well, very simply, you can say in French, je préfère la salade. Je préfère la salade. I prefer the salad. Notice the salad is a noun. And here's what's exciting about this. The more nouns that you know, the more things that you can say with just the one subject verb, je préfère. You're only limited by how many nouns you know. So learn more nouns and you can say more. So let's take this restaurant scenario a little further. You have the choice of all of these items here, and you can use any one of these nouns after je préfère. Now here's the old-fashioned technique that I was telling you about at the beginning of the video. On this portion of the video, I'm going to tell you the English first, and then I will tell you the French. So the challenge is, play back this portion of the video, and perhaps just listen, close your eyes, listen to the English, and before I say the French, see if you can produce the French. When you get to the point where you can produce every single item on this list, then you've really learned something. So that's the old-fashioned technique. No AI, no amazing, entertaining videos, just simply forcing your brain to work a little bit. It's really good for your brain. Okay, so let's start this particular session. So if I want to say in French, I prefer the salad, you would say, je préfère la salade. Je préfère la salade. The chicken. I prefer the chicken. Je préfère le poulet. Je préfère le poulet. The fish. I prefer the fish. Je préfère le poisson. Je préfère le poisson. So now you have a choice of drinks, and one of them is coffee. So if you want to say, I prefer the coffee, you would say, je préfère le café. Je préfère le café. You have your choice of desserts, and one of them is ice cream. So if you want to say, I prefer the ice cream, je préfère la glace. Je préfère la glace. Again, with your choice of drinks, and one of them is tea, you want to say, I prefer the tea. Je préfère le thé. Je préfère le thé. Meat, la viande, you want to say, I prefer the meat. Je préfère la viande. Je préfère la viande. I prefer the potatoes. Je préfère les patates. Je préfère les patates. I prefer the bread. Je préfère le pain. Je préfère le pain. I prefer the juice. Je préfère le jus. Je préfère le jus. I prefer the sandwich. Je préfère le sandwich. Je préfère le sandwich. I prefer the soup. Je préfère la soupe. Je préfère la soupe. Did you get them all right? If you did, fantastic. You're really top-notch in your French skills. If not, keep practicing this little section until you get them all right. Okay, on to the next. We'll go a little bit faster. We're just changing the subject pronoun. So she prefers. Elle préfère. She prefers the salad. Elle préfère la salade. She prefers the chicken. Elle préfère le poulet. She prefers the fish. Elle préfère le poisson. She prefers the coffee. Elle préfère le café. She prefers the ice cream. Elle préfère la glace. She prefers the tea. Elle préfère le thé. She prefers the meat. Elle préfère la viande. She prefers the potatoes. Elle préfère les patates. She prefers the bread. Elle préfère le pain. She prefers the juice. Elle préfère le jus. She prefers the sandwich. Elle préfère le sandwich. She prefers the soup. Elle préfère la soupe. So remember, a conjugated form of préférer in the present tense and a noun. So that's the first important thing that you can do with préférer. So here's the second amazing thing that you can do with préférer. We often talk about preferring to do something. So in French, that would be préférer, faire quelque chose, to prefer to do something. So this part, to do something, is represented by an infinitive. So what you do is you conjugate préférer in the present tense, and then the next word is an infinitive. For example, if I want to say, I prefer to go, I would simply say, je préfère, conjugated verb in the present tense, and then the infinitive, to go, aller. Do you prefer to stay or to go? You might say, well, I prefer to go. Je préfère aller. I prefer to speak. Je préfère parler. I prefer to play. Je préfère jouer. I prefer to drive. Je préfère conduire. I prefer to fly. Je préfère voler. I'm sure some of you are thinking this if you already know the verb voler. Voler has two meanings. One means to fly. The other meaning is to steal. So just depending on context, well, if you say je préfère voler, that could also mean to steal. But in this lesson, we're talking about flying. So again, the meaning of voler just depends on the context of your conversation. So if your home is in disorder, you might say, I prefer to tidy up, which is the verb ranger. So, je préfère ranger. I prefer to dance. Je préfère danser. I prefer to sleep. Je préfère dormir. I prefer to read. Je préfère lire. I prefer to work. Je préfère travailler. I prefer to travel. Je préfère voyager. And I prefer to do DIY work, to do home improvements, to putter around the house and fix things. Remember, bricoler is a little difficult to translate to English. So that would be je préfère bricoler. So let's finish up with a few more examples. We'll change the subject here to nous. So we have our verb form préférons. So we prefer, nous préférons. We prefer to go, nous préférons aller. We prefer to talk, nous préférons parler. We prefer to play, nous préférons jouer. We prefer to drive, nous préférons conduire. We prefer to fly, nous préférons voler. We prefer to tidy up, nous préférons ranger. We prefer to dance, nous préférons danser. We prefer to sleep, nous préférons dormir. We prefer to read, nous préférons lire. We prefer to work, nous préférons travailler. We prefer to travel, nous préférons voyager. And we prefer to do DIY work or to do home improvements. Nous préférons bricoler. So if I could sum this lesson up in the least amount of information, it would be what you see here on the board. Remember that you use a conjugated form of préférer plus a noun and a conjugated form of préférer plus an infinitive. And the more nouns you know, the more infinitives you know, the sky's the limit. One final thing, just a reminder that préférer falls into a group of verbs that have a similar spelling change where the e accent aigu changes to an e accent grave in all of the forms except for the nous and the vous. So espérer, préférer, répéter, exagérer, and protéger. All of these verbs exhibit the same spelling change. If you're taking a college French class, it's more than likely that you'll be tested over this group of verbs, that you know how to conjugate them, you know how to spell them. So it's important to see that they all fall into the same category. Okay, well, that's it for this lesson. Thank you so much for watching. If you're still here, double thanks. I appreciate you watching the lesson all the way to the end. If you found this helpful, I would appreciate it very much if you'd give it a like. Consider sharing it with somebody else that's learning French. And subscribers, thank you for subscribing so much. Thank you for all your support. To go on to another lesson, click on the video that appears here on your screen. See you soon. À bientôt.